Hello and welcome once again to Cultural Caravan. I'm your host for this series where we're exploring the history of Kenosha and Kenosha County. Today we will be in episode 4, which will include the 1860s and a little of the 1870s. We concluded in episode 3 with the story of the Durkee home. We will start out this section of our studies with what happened to the Durkee home. I'm sure many of you know. Also in the 1860s, of course, was the Civil War, and Kenosha was involved in that, and we'll touch on that. A tragic fire happened in the latter part of our series here, episode 4, and that was the fire at the Holiday House, which stood on the corner where Bodie Brothers had a disastrous fire some years later. But before we get into our story today, I'd like to take you down to the Gilbert Simmons Library, that is the research library in Library Park, where we'll see what facilities they have if you're interested in doing some backup research work on Kenosha history. Hi there once again. We're at the Gilbert Simmons Library in the reference section, and I have with me at this time Tracy Blashka. And Tracy is the head reference librarian in this area. Tracy, will you tell our viewers what your position is and what you have here?
Certainly. I'm actually head of reference and electronic services for the Kenosha Public Library system. And I oversee reference collections both at all of the agencies as well as those that are accessed electronically through the World Wide Web or through CD-ROM format or online service. We're standing here in the Simmons reference room, and all of the shelves that you see are housing our reference works, our print works. Over here on this side of the library is all the Kenosha reference works, followed by Kenosha genealogical works, then the general reference collection, followed up by our documents and our Kenosha authors collection. And we can take a look at some of our Kenosha works. Okay, here we are in our circulating collection, and we have several Kenosha works pulled out from the shelf. We have Growth and Change in a Wisconsin county. We have the City of Kenosha and Kenosha County. And we have the Memoirs of Mary D. Bradford, among other works that can be checked out from the Simmons Library. We welcome you to come on into the Simmons Library for any Kenosha research or any research you need to do. We have reference librarians on staff all the time to help you in your studies, and you'll enjoy a beautiful building as well. Thank you.
This entrance to Kemper Hall is the old Charles Durkee home of 1860. This home was the first building of the Kemper Hall School for Girls. Other buildings have been attached to and built around this home, but the outline and window shapes can still be distinguished. The light square spots in the wall are class memorials. This is the Durkee House Hotel. This hotel was built by Charles Durkee in 1843 and burned on January 31st, 1871. It was claimed to be the first brick hotel in Wisconsin. The brick was made by Thomas Howland and his sons at the Kill west of 22nd Avenue, near which Jerome Creek flowed. 22nd Avenue was named for the Howland family. The clay of which the bricks were made was dug from pits located in what was Anderson Park, now the location of St. Joseph High School. At the time of its opening, the Durkee House was hailed as the largest, most elegant hotel in Wisconsin. The Charles Durkee School in 1904. The Charles Durkee School was built in 1877 on the corner of Ashland Avenue and Dayton Street, now Sheridan Avenue at 62nd Avenue. In 1876, the school board began to cast about for a site for a new grade school. In June of 1877, a lot on Ann Street, now Sheridan Road, was purchased from Mr. Easterbrook for $550. At the same meeting, it was reported that the Durkee estate was ready to pay a legacy of $5,000 to the Kenosha schools. Mr. Durkee, in his last will, bequeathed the sum of $5,000 for the purpose of a telescope for the use of the high school at Kenosha. In September of 1877, Mrs. Durkee consented to the use of this bequest for the erection of a school. It was voted by the board to name the school the Charles Durkee School and to have a stone so inscribed placed in the gable of the building, and another with erected 1877 from funds bequeathed by Honorable Charles Durkee placed in front over the door. The original photograph of this lady was found in the belongings of Miss Lois Northway in 1935. The person in the photograph is not known. The photo shows the type of dress that was much in style in the period of the late 1850s or 1860s. During the 11 days preceding April 15, 1861, a few patriotic Kenosha women worked day and night making with their own skilled hands a beautiful silk flag. The flag was presented to the Park City Greys, a company of Civil War recruits formed in Kenosha, on the afternoon of April 26, 1861. On the following day, April 27, 1861, with this flag flying at the head of the column, the Park City Greys went to Milwaukee to join the 1st Volunteer Infantry, Wisconsin's prompt response to Abraham Lincoln's call for 75,000 men for 3 months of service. This flag was carried by the Park City Greys for 3 months, and later by another Kenosha company for 3 years. At the conclusion of the Civil War, the flag was returned to Kenosha, and after being cared for by Mr. Frank H. Lyman for years, it was donated to the Kenosha High School. With appropriate patriotic ceremonies, on May 29, 1908, in the assembly room of the Kenosha High School, this flag of 1861 was donated to the school and later placed in a special case to be displayed in the high school. It is still encased and hangs in the main hallway of Ruther High School. Captain Donald Cassius McVean was the leader of the Park City Greys, the first company to tender its services to the governor after the fall of Fort Sumter. At the end of 3 months' service, the regiment reorganized for 3 years of federal service. Captain McVean lost the leg at Chickamauga. He reached the rank of major in his military career. Kenosha's first school teacher, the Reverend Jason Lothrop, was once a medical student. He planned to pursue a medical career but was forced to give up his studies because of ill health. He was born at Taunton, Massachusetts in 1794. He studied at Yale and later became editor of the Baptist Register. Later he moved to Newport, New York, where he served as a minister for about 12 years. A Baptist minister, at the time he became a member of the Western Immigration Company, he landed in Southport from Hannibal, New York on the schooner Detroit on August 15, 1835. He was the first minister to locate here. He drafted the Articles of Association of the Western Immigration Company. Besides being a minister, he was a school teacher, surveyor, printer, and bookbinder. He preached the first Protestant sermon here on the first Sunday in November of 1836. When writing to his father in a letter dated in 1836, he said, "I am situated on the west side of Lake Michigan, half a mile from its shore, where it is probable there will be a harbor and a pretty town. Although beyond the boundaries of civilization and on Indian grounds and sometimes among the natives, yet we have our Sabbaths and meetings every Sabbath, in which I venture to take my part." The Reverend Lothrop died September 2nd, 1870, at the age of 76 years. This is the home of Reverend Jason Lothrop in 1861. This home was located on the south side of 50th Street, or Middle Street, between Sheridan Road and 8th Avenue. It is believed that in this house was carried on Mr. Lothrop's activities of bookbinding and printing. The house was torn down in June of 1937. The Township of Paris, Kenosha County, in memory of Civil War veterans from the township, erected a soldier's monument. It is located about 12 miles west of Kenosha on Highway 142, the old Burlington Road. This was the first monument erected in Wisconsin and dedicated to the soldiers of the Civil War, and paid for by an appropriation of a town board. The names of the veterans from Paris Township that served in the war are engraved on the monument. The photograph of the young lady in the upper left square is Miss Flora Parrish. She attended Kenosha High School and taught at Dexter Corners School in the early 1860s. Her dress is of the style of about 1862. The little girl in the center photograph is unknown. The chair seat is adorned with a tidy. Her dress is of the 1864 style. Abby Gilbert's photograph in the right upper square was taken about 1862, and her dress reflects that era. The young lady in the photograph in the left circle is Miss Mary Head, later Mrs. Fred Gottfriedson, about the time she was in high school. She has a waterfall style of hairdressing with a net. The photo is dated 1863. The lady with arms on the upholstered support in the right circle is not known. Her dress is trimmed with velvet, and she has a dainty curl of hair resting on her shoulder. The photo is dated 1863 and shows a type of hairdressing of that date. The group of three ladies in the lower square display styles of about 1887. Dominant dressmakers decreed the skirts would have to be fuller than they ever had been before. The usual materials were too limp to support the flounces that were part of the mode. Even a dozen starched petticoats wouldn't serve, so a material known as crinoline was developed. It was made of horse hair and flax and could almost stand alone. But alas, even crinoline was too flabby, and the dressmakers, harassed by their own genius, cried loudly to steelmakers for help. The artificers came up with some new gadgets in the way of steel springs and hoops. A lady became a walking hardware store. Strangely enough, she liked it. Skirts bellowed out. You could sail a boat with the material a 100-pound girl had to lug about with her. Statistics compiled in 1854 showed that the steel manufacturers of the world were making 10 million pounds of dress springs a year. That is what kept the ladies getting more and more tent-like. The style held on through the days of the Civil War and well into the 1870s. Then came a mild revolt. Skirts shrunk a little, but the pannier came in. It was a looped-over dress that emphasized the size of the hips. With it came a problem. What would a dressmaker hang his panniers on? The stroke of genius known as a bustle was the answer. It was a device, often of wire, sometimes of padding, that made a lump near the base of the spine. The relieved dressmaker decreed bigger ones. To balance their customers fore and aft, they built them out in front, above the waist. The First National Bank was established in the building shown here as City Bank of Kenosha in 1852. It was at the corner of Main and Park Streets, that is at 6th Avenue and 59th Place. At this location on January 21, 1864, it was granted a charter as a national bank by Hugh McCullough, first U.S. Comptroller of Currency, and given the charter number of 212. In 1885, the bank moved to the corner of Main and Market Streets, or 6th Avenue and 56th Street. The Woodworth Post Office was conducted in connection with a general store by Esther Clausen. The building dates to 1855 or 1856, when the mail was carried by the railroad. The post office at Woodworth in Kenosha County was established in 1865 and was used by the railroad until trucks took over the business. The following detailed descriptions of the ladies' dress styles were published in Frank Leslie's Ladies' Magazine of February 1868. Figure number 1, dress of Bismarck cloth with an empress fichu of the same material, heavily lined and wadded, except where it is crossed in front and fastened in loops with long ends at the back. The trimming is composed of velvet, ribbon, passementerie, and fringe. Round hat of black velvet trimmed with green. Figure number 2. Low corsage of black velvet with revers or lapels of green satin, with narrow satin folds piped with gold color satin. There are 4 pointed tabs of velvet descending from the skirt, bound with a fold of green satin piped with gold color and with leaves of satin finished with gold. Underskirt of green satin covered with a flounce and overskirt of green tulle. The flounce is trimmed with gold colored satin. Tab of velvet on the sleeves, retained in place by a satin rosette. Figure number 3, slip of white silk covered by a dress of silk gauze. There is a deep flounce at the bottom, edged with a ruche of amber silk and 2 puffs at the top of the flounce, separated by rouleaux of amber silk. A ruche of amber silk forms bretelles upon the waist, and also ornaments the front breadth of the skirt in conjunction with tassels and rosettes of white lace graduated in size. The sleeves are formed by fans of silk gauze, edged with a quilling of amber silk and headed with a rosette. Figure number 4, the dress and pailette of purple plush. The underskirt is trimmed with narrow pipings of satin, beaded galloon, and buttons. The upper skirt is looped up at the sides with ornaments of satin edged with beaded galloon. The center of the front breadth is similarly trimmed. The paillettot has beaded galloon and buttons put on in a tasteful design. Coat sleeves. Figure number 5, underdress of white figured silk with 2 flounces of black lace at the bottom of the skirt and with streamers and loops of white satin ribbon falling from the waist. Low corsage, the upper portion of which is white satin and sleeves of black lace. Tunic of green satin with 2 flounces of white lace on the bottom of the skirt. The sides are turned back, displaying a lining of white satin and ornamented with rich galloon beaded with pearls. Figure number 6, the underskirt of white silk trimmed with 3 narrow flounces of white lace. Overdress of blue moire, antique, cut in a Gabrielle or princess style without a seam at the waist. It is quite short in front and has a blue ribbon knotted and edged with silver cord with tassels at the ends. The garment is edged with narrow white lace, beaded with silver cord and braided with silver. Tiny sleeves with a fall of white lace, silver buttons down the front, and 3 buttons on one side of the waist where the dress is fastened. Figure number 7, dress of light Bismarck moire antique, richly ornamented with pipings of white satin beaded in certain places with pearls, and low corsage springing over the hips and forming basques. The trimming, which is the same as that upon the skirt, is put on so as to simulate lapels over the bosom. There are ornaments of pearls looping up the sleeves and on the bosom and at the waist. And figure number 8, dress of velveteen. The partitus is cut in deep points and has flowing sleeves. It is not quite tight-fitting and is confined at the waist by a belt. The trimming consists of beaded gimp and rich ornaments of passementerie. Round hat of velvet trimmed with a satin scarf and plume. This view of downtown Kenosha was taken in 1870 and is viewed looking north from the corner of Park Street or 57th Street. Notice the dirt road, the sprinkling wagon in the center of the street, and the planked sidewalk and crosswalk. There was only one street lamp, and that is 1 block north at Market Street on 56th Street. The street sprinkler also was used to supply another want, the furnishing of water for masons, plasterers, and other home building tradesmen. These were the days before a public waterworks. In 1901, the City Council was finding it very difficult to decide whether new walks, which had to be built on Main Street or 6th Avenue, should be of the wooden kind as shown in this photograph, or of the new concrete type. This view is of Kenosha's Grand Avenue, or 52nd Street, looking west. The large building at the left with the lean-to on each side is one of the first buildings of the N.R. Allen Sons Tannery. In the 1870s, the Allen Tannery was described as a big barn. Note the boardwalks, wooden bridge over Pike Creek, and the dirt streets. Of interest at this time was Ordinance Number 8. That changed the penalty for driving over the Main or 6th Avenue and the Grand Avenue or 52nd Street bridge faster than a walk, the fine being raised from $2 to $5, and forbidding under penalty the stacking of hay or straw or any other combustible substances within 50 feet of any dwelling, store, or shop. This photograph was probably taken from the roof or upper floor of the Kenosha Water Cure building. The Halliday House in 1870. The Halliday House was originally the Durkee home erected by Charles Durkee on the site where the Bodie Furniture Store later stood. That is, on the northeast corner of 6th Avenue and 55th Street. A four-story structure, the Halliday House represented at one time the utmost in comfort and hotel service. It had been in use for somewhat more than 22 years when it was swept by a disastrous fire. This is the Halliday House in 1871. According to an account of the tragic fire which destroyed the Halliday House, as noted in the Kenosha Telegraph 2 days after the fire, it was stated, quote, "The fire was first discovered and the alarm given at 4:30 on the morning of January 31st by some young men who had attended the masquerade party at the Park City House in the North Ward, and they did all they could to assist the inmates of the hotel in making their escape." The origin of the fire was never properly established, despite a lengthy and exhaustive coroner's inquest. The flames were believed to have started either in the lamp room or the adjacent washroom on the first floor off the lobby. A Mr. Fuller, the hotel clerk, had been asleep in the parlor on the second floor when he heard the cries of warning. If he had sought to escape immediately, his life would have been saved. But instead, he ran to the upper floors to spread the warning and to save others who might be in danger. His body was later found in the ruins. A near victim of the tragedy was Osmond Capron, who was so severely burned that no hope was held out for his recovery at first. A woman resident of the hotel who attended the masquerade testified that she reached the Halliday House some 15 minutes before the alarm was sounded. She found her own lamp waiting on the marble-topped desk in the lobby, and after lighting it, left her match extinguished on the counter in a receptacle provided for that purpose. She testified, in peering into the lamp room where a considerable quantity of kerosene was constantly kept, she saw a small lamp without a chimney burning on the shelf. She had seen this lamp burning on several similar occasions, she said. In this case, nothing appeared to be amiss, and she ascended to her room on the third floor. About a quarter of the hour later, cries of fire resounded, and she was forced to flee through smoke-filled corridors. Whether the lamp mentioned in the testimony was to blame for the fire, or whether one of the men residing at the hotel had returned from the masquerade and carelessly dropped a lighted match and started the blaze, was never determined. 6 of those trapped in the hotel were never able to make their way out, and a 7th, suffering intensely from burns and suffocation, succumbed several hours after being taken from the burning building. Tragedy struck heaviest at the Merrill family, which resided on the 3rd floor. Mrs. J.B. Merrill and her 4 children perished in a blaze. Other victims were Edwin Wade and Simon Fuller, the hotel clerk, who died in a heroic attempt to save the others from the fire. Several persons testified that they heard cries from the Merrill room and, later, in the corridor, and assumed that the Merrills were groping their way toward an avenue of escape. If they had sought the side staircase, they probably would have reached safety. But apparently they became panic-stricken, and after finding the main stairway cut off, ran back to their rooms. Their bodies were later found in the basement, where they had dropped when the floors gave way. The drawing from which this slide was made was found attached to an old map. The author is not known, and the date is believed to be sometime in the early 1870s. This drawing shows Pike Creek as it may have appeared before the harbor was extended to the west side of the Main Street Bridge. Of particular note is the picket fence board sidewalks, dirt roadways, and the lamppost, all part of the city at that time. When first built, the building that is shown was known as the Academy and served for educational purposes. Later it became the National Hotel and subsequently the Water Cure. The building was built in 1840 and burned on February 2nd, 1890. After the Kenosha Water Cure building was destroyed by fire in 1890, the Penoyers built the sanitarium on the lakeshore. This building became St. Catherine's Hospital. The Kenosha Water Cure was located near the City Harbor and Lake Michigan and a short distance east of the railroad depot. Being at that time the oldest water cure in the Northwest and desirous of attaining the best results in the treatment of chronic diseases, nothing was spared to make it equal to any establishment of its kind in the country. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, as a boy, spent a summer at the sanitarium while his mother, Sarah Delano Roosevelt, was receiving treatments there. The buildings and grounds were described at the time as, quote, overlooking the lake, passing vessels and the shipping of the port are in view, while the variety of colors of the water in sunshine and shadow, and it changes in storm and quiet. They form a pleasant and restful outlook that few places in the country enjoy. It forms a most desirable resort for those needing rest or treatment, unquote. This old windmill was located at Truesdale, Wisconsin on Highway 50. The windmill was built by Victor Lindquist, a native of Sweden, about 1871, and was used for many years for grinding feed and flour. In the year 1888, the old mill passed into the possession of Jacob Alstead and his son Edward. In 1890, steam power was added to use when the wind failed. In 1913, after 42 years of use, this Truesdale landmark was torn down.
Well, this concludes episode 4 of our study of Kenosha and Kenosha County. I'm sorry that we found out that fire in those days was every bit as tragic as it is today. Imagine the Merrill family completely destroyed and lost in that fire, their bodies dropping 3 stories into the basement. Fire then as well as now. Fire then as well as now was always a tragic affair. The fire department at the time was volunteers. And because of fires of this nature and the wooden structure of most of the buildings, fire departments became more prominent. We will see Kenosha getting their first fire department shortly. You'll also notice that the people of Kenosha, particularly the women, are taking more to fashions of the time. And we'll also investigate more of that. It's hard to believe that the women had to put up with the type of dresses we've noticed before. Well, I hope you'll join us next time for episode 5 as we continue our study of Kenosha and Kenosha County. Thank you for watching. This is your host, Ed Werner. Good night.